Hello, this is Joseph Drust. I am a senior character artist at Vicious Cycle Software, and this is a Pixelogic Z Classroom tutorial on baking out MatCaps. Before starting, I'd like to give a quick thanks to Ty Shelton for the use of this computer, and Susan Lau for the original concept of the model I will be doing the demo with. This tutorial is going to cover how to take a simple texture and using ZBrush generate out elaborate details with the MatCap system, then baking these details out into texture maps that can then be applied to the final model. To start off, you're going to need three things. The first thing you will need is a plugin called Image Plane from the ZBrush Download Center. To see if you have Image Plane installed, go to Texture at the top of your screen and see if there's an Image Plane tab. If you do not have an Image Plane tab here, you will need to go to the ZBrush Download Center and download this, since we will be using it in the tutorial. Next, we need a subdivided mesh with UVWs. Here we have a quick creature sculpt. This was done in ZBrush. As you can see, it has 7 subdivisions. It has been unwrapped in 3D Studio Max and brought back in, so it has UVWs. Finally, we're going to need a quick texture through polypainting or other means. This texture was created through polypainting. As you can see, it is just simply blotches of color, and no real details have been fleshed out. Now when sculpting, I usually sort through a wide range of MatCaps in order to find a precise look and feel that I'm trying to capture with the sculpt. Using the ZBrush MatCap library, I have downloaded a few. This first MatCap is called Loadin' 3. This MatCap is giving a nice surface texture across the top of the model. Next, we have Toy Plastic. This is a standard MatCap that comes with ZBrush. It has a high specular value, which generates a gooey surface across the model. And finally, we have DJ Inner Truth. This MatCap was also downloaded from the ZBrush MatCap library and has some variations that may possibly serve as a nice underlying texture to the model. Now that we've found a few MatCaps, it's time to bake them out. The first step is to generate a displacement map from your subdivided mesh. Now this mesh that I'm using here is broken into multiple subtools. For this example, I'm just going to generate a displacement map for the body portion of the creature. So I'm going to first hide all other elements. In ZBrush, the next step to generate a displacement is to simply go to Geometry, set your subdivisions to 1, and then go down to the Displacement tab. Once you're in the Displacement tab, make sure your resolution is set for your final texture map. In this case, 2048 by 2048. Also make sure that Adaptive is turned on, and then hit Create Displacement. Once you hit this, the mesh will subdivide, and you'll get a bar across the top of your screen. And here we have the final displacement map generated through ZBrush. And since this mesh did contain multiple subtools, I have compiled all the subtools together into one displacement. The next step is we need to crop and fill our canvas to match the texture size in which we're going to end up with, which is a 2048 by 2048. To do this, there's one simple way. First, make sure you have your final displacement loaded. Click on it, and then go to Crop and Fill. Hitting Crop and Fill will resize your entire document to the size. So now we have our document sized 2048 by 2048. Now that we have our document size cropped to the size of our texture map, we're going to first clear the canvas by hitting Ctrl-N. As you now see, we have a gray background. We're going to change this gray background to black, so we're going to switch color, hit the document background color to black, and make sure the range value is set to 0. If the range value is not set to 0, you're going to end up with a gradient value in the back, and since this will be the background of our texture, you probably do not want a gradient. After this is done, make sure the material is set to flat color, and make sure you have your texture loaded, and now go to Texture and Load Image. What this is going to do, it is going to take your texture and apply it onto a plain 3D object, which will then be cropped to completely fill your document. As you can see, the plain 3D object comes in with a Move tool on it. So we're going to first switch out of Move into Edit Object. Once we're in here, we're going to make this a Polymesh 3D. So go to Tools and then click Polymesh 3D. The document will, the plane 3D object, which is now a Polymesh 3D object, will come in white. So we need to first load back into our placement and load back our diffuse. We should end with something like this. As you'll notice, this is purely just the poly-painted diffuse texture applied to a plane. You're not getting any of the values or any of the stuff that we saw with the load and MatCaps. To start getting these, we're going to first go to the material and take load in 3. So now we end up with a version that's pretty much the color load in 3 with the details of that poly paint diffuse underneath it. But still no values of any of the stuff that we saw before. So to get those, first we go to Displacement tab over here, and there's an intensity slider. We're going to take this intensity slider and first type in the value of, say, 20 and hit enter. Now you'll see that this intensity is now taking the displacement and applying it to the actual plane. So you can see we're starting to get some of these values of the load in 3 actually baked into this object. Since this is a slider, you can change this to whatever value you want and it'll update on the fly. So typing in 10 will give us less, and say typing in 30 will give us a little more. So just keep playing with that value until you end up with, some value that you like. So I think 30 is probably going to do it from this. We got some areas I'm going to clean up, but it looks pretty decent. Now, to show you the power of this, there's 3 things that you can modify right now in this current state. The first is the intensity slider. The second is the MatCap. So first we can take any MatCap we have. So there's toy plastic. So now we get all these slimy, gooey elements. We also have DJ Inner Truth, which was the other one we had. You can see we're not getting these little reddish areas that were actually pulling out before on the final model, and now it's applied to this map. When these are actually loaded in, you can also edit the material value. So if you go to the material up here, now edit these modifiers, and you can change the intensity of these. So say if I want this DJ Inner Truth to be a little bit brighter. Oh, there we go. Now we just keep changing these until we get exactly what we want out of the material. The final thing we can tweak is the actual displacement itself. If we go to the Alpha tab, there's all these values here in which we can adjust in order to update the actual displacement. So if we think some of these elements are too sharp, we can change this blur function. So say we put in a blur of 2, and you'll now see it's a little more blurrier than it was before. Now if you want to get these values back to the original one, it's pretty simple. You go to Alpha, you just reset the values to what they used to be, and the displacement map updates just like that. Now once you have something that you like, you can now capture this with Grab Dock. To do that, you just go to Texture, and you hit the Grab Dock button. It will take a snapshot of your document and store it into a texture map that you can then export out to final models, other programs, whatever you like. Also remember that when doing Grab Dock, that you can render the actual MatCaps too. To render, just go to Render and hit Best, and you'll see the MatCap will start to render. Now oftentimes a lot of the details that MatCaps have won't be visible until you click Render, so it's oftentimes a good practice to do both versions, the one not rendered and the one with best render, and then take the one you like best. Now after this is done, you just grab Dock and you're good to go. In this section, I'm going to quickly show you another way in which you can edit this actual texture map that is applied to this plane, and how you can use ZBrush to achieve a layering system similar to what Photoshop has for the different MatCaps. To start off with, we have our plane 3D object loaded, our diffuse texture is turned on, displacement is on, and we have the intensity set to 30 in the displacement menu. With this set to 30, we're getting this value, which is pretty good. We can check to see if that's what we want, and I think 30 is good. We're going to now take this to half of whatever it is. So if it's 30, we're going to take it to 15. And now we're going to go to the Geometry tab of this actual plane 3D, and we're going to subdivide it to 5 or 6 times. So we're going to do this to 6. So now we have this plane 3D, Polymesh plane 3D object subdivided to 6. And we have the intensity set to 15. So we're going to first hit Mode, we're going to hit the apply displacement. And what this will do is it's going to bake the displacement map into this plane 3D object. So now we can turn off the displacement and the diffuse, and you'll see that it is now rendered onto a plane. From here, we now have a tangible piece of ZBrush geometry. So we can actually come in and smooth out certain areas. So say if we didn't like these little wrinkles that were happening here, we can just hold shift and smooth them out and actually update our map. Some of these areas would have to be cleaned up a little bit more, but we can now come in and carve and fix some of these areas that were giving us possibly some problems in the other map we had. With this like this, we can now take it to a few steps further, and we will actually load the diffuse texture back in. And we're going to go to the texture menu, turn on colorize, and we're going to bake this texture into the plane 3D. So by hitting texture to color, we now have lost our connection with the diffuse, but it's now on the actual plane object. From here, we can now come in and actually paint different stuff on this actual model, kind of like you would in Photoshop. And you can see it's only updating the RGB channel because that's all I have selected. So this will give you some different details to say, like, you didn't like how this was like a darkened area here, you can now brighten this up and have a little more control over what's going to get generated for your final map. After you have this, say you want to apply, the toy plastic element to it. Say you wanted this with toy plastic, but then you want the other areas with the load in 3. Well, in Photoshop, you can take it in and just, make the two layers and subtract each other elements. We'll say if you don't have Photoshop, ZBrush can also do this for you. To do this, first we're going to make sure we have mRGB turned on, actually just M turned on up here. We're going to go to Color, and we're going to go to Fill Object. And what this is going to do, it's going to fill the plane with the load in 3 material. So now you can see this is now load in 3. So if we come over here and we change this, you will not see it update into anything else because load in 3 is baked into this actual map. So now we can go to this material here, pick another material, say like this toy plastic, and now we can actually paint the actual MatCap onto the surface of this geometry, which is giving us the same effect that we would have got out of a program like Photoshop. And so we can come through and actually paint the areas in that we want to be gooey or different elements, and it's just pretty nice. You can actually see it update on the fly. Since this is baked in, since the displacement is now actually baked in this map, you can't adjust the intensity at this point, so you would have to redo the process. But this gives you a nice little effect. You can actually come in and create a 2 or 3 MatCap object without having to have another program. So here's DJ 3. Inner Truth being applied. And once this is like this, you can render it out, grab doc, and then save or export the map back out.